Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Ask Us Anything About ADUs. We're so happy to have you with us here today. I'm going to go over some brief Zoom logistics and then introductions, and then we'll dive into our content for this webinar. So first of all, we are taking questions throughout this webinar this morning through the audience Q&A chat. Please start sharing your questions with us right away, and we can't wait to tackle those. We're also going to do one interactive poll. So get ready for that. You'll be able to submit it with that little blue submit button that you see circled there on the screen. Also, a huge thank you to Amity Armstrong, our admin superwoman doing all of the Zoom logistics and tech logistics in the background. She's going to be chatting, as you can see already in the chat, different information, tools, and resources for you to refer to. So without further ado, I want to introduce myself. I am Renee Schump. I'm the director of the nonprofit Napa Sonoma ADU Center. We are a fiscally sponsored project of Napa Valley Community Foundation with support from Community Foundation Sonoma County, as well as the City of Napa, City of Calistoga, County of Napa, and others. We are so happy to be here with you today. We serve as a neutral third-party resource for local homeowners, as well as our local cities and counties, to help folks understand accessory dwelling units and ADU laws and policies. I also want to introduce my colleague, Scott Johnson, our ADU expert and the founder of Pocket Housing, LLC. Scott does all of our ADU feasibility consultations with our homeowners and provides a wealth of technical expertise. You're going to be hearing from both of us today. All right, so as I mentioned, our nonprofit is here focused on being, not a member of industry, not a member of our local government, but rather this third-party nonprofit that you can come to for trusted, unbiased information before you get catalyzed on your accessory dwelling unit project. So we really aim to make sure that we get you as accurate information as possible to make sure that you're set up for success with your build. So with that, before we dive in, I want to hear a little bit from all of you. For those of you who are returning, we have asked you this question multiple times, but we are always interested in what type of construction folks are interested in. You may not know, but you may know, or you may have an idea. So you may be interested in a traditional stick-built construction on your site, or you may be interested in some kind of prefab. You may not know the type of prefab, or you may know you're interested in panelized, HUD certified manufactured, HCD certified modular. We're just curious to know where you're coming in as you're joining our conversation today. So go ahead and choose one of those, and then we will move on. So it looks like almost 70% of you are interested in a traditional stick build construction, and then about 17% interested in prefab manufactured and or prefab but don't know the type. Super helpful and interesting to see. Thank you all for sharing, and that will inform our conversation today. So before we dive in, I want to share this beautiful slide from our friends over at Baird and Driscoll Community Planning. So thank you to Brandy and the B&D team for this. This is just kind of to orient ourselves as we're diving into our conversation today. So this is an overview of the ADU process. Sometimes going into it, you can think, okay, this is going to be pretty simple. It's just like a tiny home. It's not a tiny home. That is a different legal structure. An accessory dwelling unit is a full independent living unit, and it's building an entire home, even if it is smaller than the average home, although they can be up to 1,200 square feet. They really do involve all of the complexity required for building an entire home. So our goal is to really focus on number one stage of that process that you see there, the getting started stage. That's where our nonprofit comes in to really help lay the groundwork for you for success going forward in your project, making sure that you have a good sense of the likely estimated costs, whether they are for permit fees, for the construction itself, for a design professional, etc. understand what works best on your property, what you're eligible to build on your property. For most of you, it'll be both an ADU and a junior ADU that you're eligible to build. And make sure that you are really clear on your local city or county's ADU ordinances. So we do one-on-one feasibility consults with homeowners where we sit down with you for an hour, talk through all of your questions, concerns, goals for your ADU project, take a hard look at your property virtually, and really make sure that you have a clear sense of what you're getting into, what makes the most sense for you, and then set you on your way with a customized ADU feasibility report coming out of that consult that can help you get started and understand the questions to be asking various professionals, the questions to be asking your city or county, and generally just empowered with the knowledge and information that you need before you get going on building your own small home. Okay. So with that, I want to make sure that you all are aware of some of the resources that are out there. Number one, the Redwood Credit Union recently launched, actually now it's like last February, so it's not so recent. I have to change my narrative here. I need to get with the program. But they launched this construction loan. We're really excited about it because it opens up financing for homeowners who might not otherwise be able to afford to build an ADU. It is a product that is a second lien product, so you don't have to refinance your existing mortgage. They're actually giving folks, in certain cases, over $300,000, depending on the cost of the project. And they allow you to count the future increased property value and future potential rental income from that unit in order to unlock that capital. So there's information on our website, a deep dive webinar that I think Amity is going to chat to you all to learn more about this opportunity, but I just want to make sure that you're aware of it. And with that, I'm actually going to share my screen briefly and make sure that you're aware of some of the online tools and resources on our website as well before we dive into the remainder of our content. So, oops, I just almost hit leave webinar instead of share my screen. Okay, 1 second, I'm having a technical difficulty. Share, there we go. Okay. So this is our website, napasonoma.adu.org. And I just want to make sure that you're aware of some of the key resources on it. First of all, we're very, very excited. We are going to be holding a series of in-person ADU events coming up starting this Sunday. So we have 2 weekend events, a Sunday and a Saturday, and then 2 Wednesday events. And we are going to be joined by a plethora of different ADU professionals. So we have got 3 units that are going to be on site, ranging in size from just 150 square feet. And then we're going to have a unit that's up to 740 square feet. And then this mid-sized 460 square foot unit. And we are going to be joined on various days by different professionals, finance professionals. Also very exciting. There's going to be folks from the city of Napa talking about their junior unit initiative grant, as well as from the county of Napa talking about a new affordable ADU loan program that they're going to be launching very soon. Super excited for you all to learn more about that. Plus, we're going to have, like I said, a bunch of different designers, architects, and prefab companies on site as well. All of the finance professionals that are going to be on site are going to be able to also answer your questions and get you more information about the state of California's Cal HFA $40,000 pre-development grant that is available for you, depending on your income. In our region, as long as you have a gross annual household income under, I believe it's 233,000 or so for Napa, and maybe a little bit lower for Sonoma, you will be eligible for that grant. So I want to make sure you all know about that and come join us at these events. It's going to be really fun. We're going to be at Crosswalk Community Church in the city of Napa, and we're going to be there to meet and talk with you. Scott's going to be there, answer your ADU questions. We're really looking forward to seeing folks. We held these events in Santa Rosa in July and had 750 of you come out to join. So we're really looking forward to meeting you in person, putting faces to names, and helping you get kickstarted on your project. So tell your friends. I also want to make sure that you're aware of all of the different tools and resources on our website, a key one being our ADU gallery. So this is a gallery that has over 50 different ADU plans in it. And in fact, all of the different designers, architects, and prefab companies joining us for our November in-person events all have ADU plans in this gallery. So if you come to the in-person events, we're going to give you this beautiful card that has information about the gallery on it, as well as a free ADU workbook, which you can also download from our website, but the hard copy version is really beautiful and really helpful as a step one on your way towards getting your ADU project kickstarted. So we're super excited to feature this new ADU gallery. It has pre-reviewed ADU plans in it. We can answer more questions about it, but definitely check it out. And Amity is going to share a link in the chat as well. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't share with you about our ADU calculator tool. I want to make sure that you're aware this is on our website, and it's a really helpful way for you to get a sense of likely costs for your desired ADU and start thinking about the return on your investment as well. So check that out. It's also available on the ADU tools and resources page on our site. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand it back over to you, Amity, and Scott and I very shortly are going to dive into some of the questions that are starting to pop up in the Q&A. Before we do that, though, we also want to make sure that you all have a good sense of the state ADU laws. So the relevance of state ADU laws for individual homeowners in Napa and Sonoma counties is that the state of California has really been working to streamline and make it easier for, as I mentioned earlier, most properties in the state to be eligible to build both an ADU and a junior ADU on your property. And with that, starting in 2017 and then really going strong in January 2020, the state of California issued a series of ADU laws that all of our local cities and unincorporated counties must adhere to in their local ADU ordinances. So this is a quick overview of it, which I'm going to let Scott give you a brief rundown on. And then we want to talk to you extremely briefly about new state laws that went into effect, that will be going into effect this January 2023 that further clarify and add on to those January 2020 state laws, and that will help make it easier for you to build an ADU. So with that, Scott, without going into the whole January 2020 state laws, what are a few things that you would say based on the over 320 or so feasibility consults you've done for the Napa Sonoma ADU Center that you see really in particular having an impact and making it easier for folks to build ADUs?
Yeah, great question. And, I think broadly is that if you have a residential use on your property, kind of almost no matter what it's zoned, with very rare exceptions, you can build an ADU. Now, the size and the type of ADU and all of that, that's just getting into details. But that was kind of the biggest change with the 2017 and 2020 laws is that ADUs became possible almost everywhere. Um, and it was a fairly simple, as we see here, it's sort of fairly straightforward set of laws. We call the 800 square feet, less than 16 feet tall. I call that the state exemption ADU, where essentially there are very few rules, or basically almost no rules, that prevent you from building something smaller than that size. And as you get a little bit bigger, the local jurisdictions can start to add some conditions and requirements for things that are bigger. But if you're under 800 square feet, under 16 feet tall, and you have the space to build something that size, it's very hard for this local jurisdiction to say no to. And that is a huge change from the way it was before 2020. They've reduced as we see they've reduced the fees, they've reduced the permit costs, the parking rules, relaxing the parking rules. In many cases, if you're in an area that has any public transit, you're probably within a half mile of a transit stop, which means in most cases that parking is exempt completely. Some jurisdictions, I'll shout out to Petaluma here, don't require parking at all, regardless of whether or not you're near a transit stop. Parking was a very big blocker for a lot of people. And then I think the reduction of owner occupancy requirements, at least until 2025, though that may be extended. I know there's proposals for that. Means that if you have, if you have a property or maybe you have a rental property already, you can put an ADU on it if you get the paperwork in before 2025. And I think those things have really made a big difference to a lot of people.
That's so helpful. And I'm glad you mentioned that sunsetting owner occupancy law. There are a lot of really smart policy advocates in the state that are very certain that we're going to be able to move the state before 2025 to extend or eliminate that as a sunsetting law. However, right now, under the current law, it's only going to last until 2025 that owner occupancy requirement for ADUs is waived at the state level. And so just a helpful thing to keep in mind, because we do see folks kind of sit for years on, do I want to build an ADU? I mean, I know I want to, but what about this or what about that? Listen, it's a huge financial decision. You should take it very seriously and think very thoughtfully about it. And also, we're just not seeing construction or labor costs decreasing. And so it makes me sad when I see someone who's been thinking for like 2 years about doing this, and now, see interest rates increasing, we see construction costs increasing with inflation. And darn it, like if we could have just moved 6 months ago, we'd be in a better position now. And the same, I think, is true with some caveats, perhaps, today. So with that, I actually see a very smart question from Margaret in the chat about building code changes. So we had sent out a newsletter recently saying, generally speaking, there are new building codes that go into effect every 3 years. Sorry, that's not generally speaking. That's true. But generally speaking, those new building code requirements don't make building cheaper, right? They tend to increase requirements and increase costs. And so if you are interested in building an ADU, it might be smart for you to get your permit application submitted prior to January 2023, if you can, so that you can take advantage of the existing building code requirements, which, might save some costs for you. Scott, do you have any caveats to that general rule? And what would you say to Margaret's question?
Yeah, Margaret, I'm excited that you're thinking about submitting your plans. It's great to see that you're moving forward. With the building codes, as Renee said, they do update every 3 years, and there are some updates that happen midstream as well. And they do tend to make things a little more complicated, a little more expensive. With the planning department changes, with the new ADU laws that are going to pass on January 1st, in general, the ADU laws the new laws that are coming in are only making it easier to build more. Basically, you can build a little higher. Front setbacks are sometimes waived in certain cases. Parking restrictions are lessened. Fire sprinkler requirements generally are a little bit more clarified and lessened. So you're seeing sort of two opposing forces going on. As building codes get more strict, planning codes are getting more lax when it comes to ADUs. So for Margaret's specific question about the planning department, depending on your project, you may be better off waiting until after January 1st from the planning code perspective size. Your height limitation will be less, for example, in most cases, after January 1st than it is today. However, that needs to be balanced against the increase in the building codes particularly energy efficiency requirements tend to get a little bit more strict every code update. So, you kind of have to try and balance of, do I need the extra height limit? Do I need the the parking waiver or those kinds of things? Then maybe wait till after January 1st. If you don't need those benefits from the planning code, you're probably better off submitting before January 1st in order to build under this set of current building codes that are valid until January 1st. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, that is such a great nuance to add, Scott. And I think for those of you who are sitting here being like, that was a lot of words, just tell me yes or no. Unfortunately, the problem is with a lot of projects that The answer is it depends on your parcel, what city or unincorporated county jurisdiction you're in, what type of ADU you want to build, where on your property you want it, or all of that. And so with that in mind, I just want to share again with you, and if Amity, you don't mind dropping the link, to do a one-on-one ADU feasibility consult with us, because that will allow Scott to do a deeper dive into your unique situation and let you know, yeah, like for your situation, you don't need to take advantage of any of these new January 2023 state laws, which we're going to go over with you in a minute here, as you can see on the screen. But you will perhaps benefit financially from getting in under the existing building code. So let's move forward, like go for it. And then for others, like maybe, you know, because of the new height changes for your particular project, you do want to wait until those new rules go into effect. With that, let's take a moment, Scott, to talk about the new state laws. But before we do, Sonia has a really good question about our ADU events that I want to answer. So for these in-person ADU events where we're going to have a combination of real ADUs on site that you can tour, as well as a bunch of tables and booths with various finance experts, other designers, architects, and prefab companies, folks from the city and county, you can come anytime during that window. We ask that you RSVP if possible, just so that you know we're not checking names at the door, but it gives us a sense of like the volume that we can expect for that day, which is really helpful. So please do RSVP if you plan to attend. Again, there's 4 different events on our webpage that I just showed you. You can come anytime during the window of time that the event is taking place, and all applicable COVID guidelines that are in place in the city of Napa during the time of each event are what will be followed for protocol. Of course, we always encourage masks, but just want to answer that piece of the question as well. Okay, so let's get into the state laws. So Scott, without us doing a huge deep dive into all of the new state law changes, because that would take forever, what do you see from AB 2221 here that we have up on the screen? Another shout out to Baird and Driscoll for this slide, as being some things that you think are going to most significantly impact our Napa Sonoma homeowners based on the hundreds of consults you've done up here.
I think the 60-day timeline is, should it be effective? I think the 60-day timeline, the new set of rules around the 60-day timeline will be the most impactful for anybody doing an ADU. For those of you who don't know, there was a language in the original 2020 law that said that the city, basically the local jurisdiction, the planning department, had to turn around a submittal for a building permit within 60 days, yes or no. Very few of the jurisdictions that I'm aware of managed to meet that goal consistently. And it very often wasn't their own fault. It was sometimes a third party organization, sometimes something like a sewer district or a water district wasn't part of that rule set. And so they would sit on these, well, I won't say they would sit on permits, but they were busy and it wasn't a priority for them. What this clarification in the state law does, we see that this sort of all the new ADU laws are kind of clarifications and additions to what we already have, is that any agency that has a permit sign off requirement for an ADU has to apply by the 60-day timeline. And if that actually is effective, that's going to be huge, because that can shorten people's timelines for project completion pretty dramatically. Because we've heard stories of 4 months, 6 months waiting for a permit. I've heard a horror story of 8 months waiting for a permit. That that can really delay people's time. That can delay getting their either as a rental or a home for a family unit. So I think the 60-day timeline could be a big game changer for a lot of people. The other parts of the laws, the AB 2221 and 897 or 867, most of those, as I said earlier, kind of they expand the building envelope in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases, they allow you to go a little bit taller. They allow you to do something in the front yard if you don't have room in the backyard, which we've seen homeowners come to our program where they don't really have a backyard because the placement of their house in the lot, and whether or not they could build an ADU was very dependent upon the jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions were doing a hard line saying nothing in front of the main house. This changes that. This allows for that now. So that can be, on the individual level, there are changes to the laws that can really make a difference. And I want to actually jump back to Margaret's question for a quick second. I would say that, if you need that height, wait till after January 1st. But if you don't need the extra height that you get, and she actually has been through our program, and I think under her rule set, I think she doesn't need this new rule. I would apply sooner than January 1st. But we see 18 feet and 25 feet in many circumstances. You can go taller with an ADU, which can help with footprint issues. If you've got a small backyard, you can go a little bit higher and do a second story, or have more space in a smaller footprint. So I think these are all really great laws, and I think we're gonna see this as the years go forward. The state wants ADUs. The local jurisdictions need ADUs to meet their housing numbers. They're going to try and find ways. They're going to find greater subtleties in the law to allow for more ADUs, more locations, and there are going to be a lot more conditional. I think of these as conditional approvals: 18 feet in some circumstances, 25 feet in some circumstances. We're going to see that. That's the natural development of land use law in California. So, from 2017 through 2022, the ADU law was pretty straightforward and pretty easy to explain in a very quick method. As these additional laws add more more conditions to what the kind of ADU can be, it's going to be more complicated to figure out what can be built for your particular parcel.
That's a really helpful overview, Scott. And Amity, if we could switch to the next slide, which continues. Thank you so much. One thing I also want to just chime in with, as you're saying that, is this is again a good reason to do a one-on-one feasibility consult, because if you got, I know for some folks, we did a consult for you sometime in the last couple of years. You haven't yet moved forward on your project, but you're thinking about it. And now there's all these new changes and you're probably wondering, oh, well, now is my consult irrelevant? That's why we have open ADU office hours for folks who have done an ADU consult. So any Tuesday or Friday, from 12 to 1 p.m., you can hop in a Zoom room with me and Scott and go back over what we discussed in your consult, whether it was 2 years ago or 1 year ago. And we can tell you, okay, let's review this and help you understand where you're at now and what makes the most sense for you. Again, so we, the Ask Us Anything webinars like this can be really helpful for us to give general guidelines and information and make sure the state of California has a $40,000 ADU pre-development grant. Make sure you look into that. Or there are new state law changes going into effect in 2023. This is our opportunity to kind of alert you to these general rules, but then we definitely want to talk to you one-on-one to ensure that you understand what's unique for your particular budget and property and jurisdiction. A couple thoughts on this, Scott. I was so surprised by this law about ensuring that permits can't be denied due to unpermitted work on the property and things like that. Because I always kind of felt like I don't see any of our jurisdictions really trying to go after people who are trying to build ADUs with this type of thing. But what do you think about it? And I'm hoping it'll give people more peace of mind.
Yeah, this is actually a question that we get fairly often. And a lot of times people will buy a house knowing there's unpermitted work on the property, but they didn't do it. They didn't convert the garage into a bonus room, but they're worried that they want to do an ADU, but they also don't want to get in trouble with the jurisdiction for work that was, probably not their responsibility in the first place. And in general, you're right. Our local jurisdictions are generally pretty good. If there's a life safety issue, yeah, they're going to call you on it. But if there isn't, if it's if it's less of an issue than that, they generally are more concerned about your ADU project in particular, not necessarily unpermitted work on the property. You built a fence without permits in most cases, and this is what I've been told by people who do this kind of stuff, do code enforcement. They said they're not too concerned about that. If there's a life safety issue, yeah, that's a problem. That isn't the case statewide. And there are definitely jurisdictions, and actually comes down to the individual code enforcement person. Is that, are they looking for a problem? Are they gonna, really canvass the whole property and look for issues? That can be a very individual thing. The state law clarifies the state doesn't want people to be afraid that some other non-related project is going to diminish their ability to do an ADU or get them in trouble. Because again, this speaks to the need that the state wants ADUs built. They need the housing. The local jurisdictions need the housing, and so they're clarifying and basically saying you don't get to do this. For the local jurisdiction, don't do this. This is not something we want to bother with right now. Let's just get these ADUs built, and we can worry about these other issues separately. And again, you see health and safety issues. That's always going to be the line in the sand. They're never going to ignore health and safety issues, unsafe wiring, um, things like that, because that is a life safety issue. That is a fire issue. So that's something they will never ignore. But um, but this, I think, can people can move forward with confidence, even if they have unpermitted work on their property, that they can still do an ADU project and they're not going to get in trouble with the city or the county. Um,
Really, that's really helpful. Um, and I know that a lot of people, yeah, like you said, do have a lot of fear around that. So it's helpful to have that new law in effect. Let's talk briefly about the final three bullet points here, and then we can circle back to questions that are coming in.
Yeah. So demo permit for garage is replaced by ADUs. This is an interesting one, and it's one that I've heard from homeowners who are in process. Some people who were before the 2020 law who are still trying to get their ADUs being built. They had a carport, they had a garage that they were going to tear down in order to either build an ADU in place or to provide space to get an ADU through their yard in the back. And because of the issues around demolition and the safety issues around demolition, sometimes they get held up on that, and they're still trying to get something built because the demolition issues were so complex for their particular problem. Doesn't always happen, but it does happen occasionally. And so I think this law in particular was one of those issues where um, the state the state is trying to tell the cities to be reasonable about your ADU permitting process. Again, we're pretty lucky in our area, but that's not the case statewide, where some jurisdictions would say, yeah, oh, no, we issued a permit, but we're not going to issue this demo permit because of XYZ, and therefore the ADU permit doesn't matter. You can't go forward with an ADU permit because you can't get a demo permit issued because it wasn't considered part of the ADU process. Again, the state saying, think of this holistically. We want to get ADUs built. Don't play, sort of legalistic games with the permit process to hold up ADUs, because some jurisdictions, again, luckily not in our area, are they don't like ADUs. They don't want ADUs. They want to protect whatever they think they're protecting, and so they'll find these edge cases to not get ADUs actually being built. And so the state was sort of solving that issue and saying you can't play around with this. Get ADUs built. Don't hold it up on these dumb technicalities. Um, Fire sprinklers. This is one that's tricky, because the state was pretty. The state fire marshal was very straightforward in 2017, saying if the main house doesn't have fire sprinklers, the ADU doesn't have to have fire sprinklers. But local fire marshals could find exceptions to that rule. And those of you who've been through the consulting process know that I say this all the time. Typically things like building over a garage or attached to a garage or far from a fire hydrant or far from the street, those could trigger fire sprinklers. And the state here has sort of added some weight to the don't require fire sprinklers for ADUs if the main house doesn't have fire sprinklers, to try and solve some of that, because sprinklers are expensive. I mean, they're good. They allow people time to get out of a burning building, which is not a bad thing. But when budgets are so tight, construction is so expensive, and interest rates are going up, every additional requirement adds to the cost. And fire sprinklers are not cheap. So I'm going to see how this plays out in reality. The fire departments are still very aggressive about requiring automatic fire sprinkler systems in new construction. Um, how this will be applied to ADUs in reality remains to be seen, but I think this is a move in the right direction, because sometimes that can be a project killer for some people. And the last point, ADUs no longer trigger a Group R occupancy. Group R is residential occupancy changes. I'll be honest, I don't know how this one's going to play out exactly. I'm not sure if this is. I suspect this has to do with the fire sprinkler requirement, that taking a building like a garage, a detached garage, which is not a Group R building, and then turning it into a Group R building can sometimes trigger sprinklers. I think this is to clarify that as well, to give another exemption to ADUs, um, to lessen the requirement for fire sprinklers when necessary. But I'm not 100% sure on that one. We're going to see how that one plays out, and I'm kind of waiting to hear back from some of my building department people to see what does this really mean in the practical reality.
I'm sure they have the same question. Honestly.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something, for the people who are thinking about, go back to Margaret, who are thinking about applying now or after January 1st, these new laws sometimes take a little while for the cities to understand how they really actually apply. So there is kind of there can be in the first month or two. I mean, these laws are pretty straightforward,
In the
but
first month or two, Scott, or in the
well,
first 6+ months.
I think since these laws are pretty straightforward, that it will be pretty simple for the cities to adopt these, but there can be a time lag. And so, it's one of the things that we always advocate. Homeowners, do your research. If you can, read the code yourselves, because the cities and the information, frankly, when you go to the counter and you ask questions, you may not always get correct information. It may be out of date by a few months, and that may be a big thing when you come after January 1st. So it's on you to do the research to understand what you can do. Talk to us, ask us questions. We can help with that understanding. Because if you feel like your jurisdiction is not incorporating these new laws, or even the right 2020 laws correctly, you can push back and ask for clarification. Ask to show them where the justification for their decision comes from.
And on
Um,
that note,
yeah,
I know I made that, I really should clarify. Our local cities and counties have definitely been struggling because there have been huge sweeping changes to ADU law over the past couple of years, which coincided with wildfires and COVID, and frankly, a lot of challenges with staffing. One
yeah.
of our cities had 6 open staff positions in their planning department for like 9+ months that they were working to fill. So we actually have the pleasure of getting to work with our cities and counties on the back end as a big chunk of the work that we do. And we are meeting with them on Monday to go over these very same slides and to talk through some of these matters and to help support and make sure that staff at every level in the planning and building departments are aware of these new rule changes, because from their perspective, they are also kind of scrambling to keep up. And also, sometimes these state laws are not, as you can see, written in a way that's totally clear. And so simply trying to interpret it, understand it, get feedback from the state on, intention behind new laws is also time consuming. So we're here as a nonprofit working to kind of provide that support both to our cities and counties as well as to you as these ongoing changes take effect. With
And
that, yeah,
Yeah, and I was gonna say, and and ADUs are not what they deal with all day.
right,
That is a small portion of all the other work they have to do. They've got housing elements to write, they've got general plans to update, they've got transportation plans to work, and bicycle coalitions, and commercial development. They've got everything that goes on in the city, infrastructure updates, and all of that stuff is all on their plates. And so ADUs, well, we live and breathe them, and they're the most important things that we do every day. For the cities and the staff, that's just one small part of all the things they have to keep, and the law changes for those things too every year. So
exactly.
yeah, so that's why I say, homeowners, do your research, talk to us. We do what we can talking to the jurisdictions, but also you're going to be your best advocate as a homeowner. If you do your research, if you read the codes, if you reach out for help and clarification, you can help make sure that your project is going to go the way you want it to, by understanding the rules yourself.
Yeah. With that, Amity, we can go to gallery view and eliminate the slides for the time being. And let's dig into these questions. So let's start with Ward's question.
Yeah, and Ward actually asked a really good question that ties back to the new law updates. Now Ward is looking like he's doing, I see two there. He's above a garage in Napa. Now in Napa, I was just reading the ordinance. They say 16 feet, but you can go taller with a little bit of oversight. I believe it is a zoning administrator meeting in Napa for going higher than 16 feet. So this is the kind of thing I was talking about, where you've got that state exempt ADU envelope, 16 feet tall, 800 square feet. And inside that, they basically have to say yes. Above that, this is where they get to add oversight. And so because you want to go taller than 16 feet, you want to go to a second story, the city of Napa wants to be able to say, you're right on your neighbor's property line, you'd be looking right down into their bedroom or their pool or whatever it is. They want to have a human be able to look at it and go, we're concerned about this issue, this privacy issue, or this looming over or shading something, just so they have a little bit of control over over the built environment, which is what their whole reason for being is. So the short answer is you can go taller than 16 feet in Napa with zoning administrator oversight. Not a big deal, and that's fairly easy to do. Post January 1st, going higher is going to be easier. So it'll be 18 feet, possibly 25 feet, depending on where you are, ward. So that may be a non-issue after January 1st in terms of the zoning administrator oversight. Um, Many jurisdictions, I'll speak broadly beyond Napa here, many jurisdictions have allowances for ADUs over garages written into their ordinance that basically say if it's attached or over your garage, it can be as tall as the existing structure or the zoning allows. I didn't see that in Napa's code this morning. I'd have to go back and reread it a little more carefully, but that's the kind of typical response that we see from most jurisdictions for attached ADUs. And I think Napa's, there is an out to go taller than 16 feet, and it will be taller after January 1st. I hope that
Gopal
answers
has a follow-up question to that. Does 18 or 25 feet allowed mean a 2-story must be allowed?
in general, yes, it seems like it will be. The where the 18 and 25 feet allowances are happen, um, there right now the state law is fairly clear. I'm taking this from memory, but from what I remember, it is if you're within half a mile of a transit stop. Now, what I've seen in other areas outside of Napa Sonoma is that sometimes they change the ordinance to say major transit stop or transit oriented development. So that doesn't necessarily mean any bus stop on the street. It may mean like an actual transit hub or something. So as I read the law, it seems fairly clear the state says, if you're within half a mile of any transit stop, you can go to this higher dimension. I will suspect that depending on your jurisdiction, that it may not be quite that generous in the future. They may say major transit stop, and that is open to interpretation. So we'll see how that goes.
Thanks for that, Scott.
Yeah.
Let's turn to Gopal's other question. Is there any move to align the 800 square foot guaranteed allowed build by increasing no additional fees for build from 750 to 800 square feet? I haven't
That's
heard anything on this, but
Yeah, I haven't either. I wish they would because
it
it
really
honestly,
confused me at the beginning, especially of doing this work. I was like, 750 for no impact fees, 800. Okay,
Those-
why?
yeah, the homeowners in the chat who've gone through the process may remember me going. It takes me about 10 minutes to start talking about the sizes and how there's different benefits of different sizes and the honestly it's tough to explain. It's hard to keep straight in your head. Um, I wish they would align it so there was 800 square feet and less, and just have 800 square feet be the number. It's not, and I don't see any. I haven't seen any legislation that proposes that. So the short answer is no. There is no movement to align that. I wish there was. Um, but I'll say the same say the caution that I tell people who come through our process. Don't choose your project size based on the permit cost, particularly if it's going to be for rent, even rent to family. Um, Choose it based on the good layout of the structure, because that's really what's going to matter in the long term. I've When I used to do design build, I was part of a team that we built 740 some odd square foot 2 bedroom ADUs, and they're fine. But I've also been in 820, 850 square foot ADUs, 2 bedroom ADUs, and the truth is they actually feel substantially bigger, much more than that 100 square feet would seem to add. And
I lived
so
in a 720 square foot 2 bedroom ADU, and I can attest that my
it can
kitchen
feel
was the
small.
the size of a postage stamp.
Yeah, I mean, and particularly if you've got a couple and a baby, like it can feel pretty small pretty quick. 850 square feet is a much more livable size.
Yeah,
And so I caution people, I say, look at your budget, because that permit cost difference is going to it's going to come back and rent in a year or two. Because you can rent a larger ADU for more money is really what it comes down to. So, you know, be aware of the size price breaks on the permits, 500 square feet, 750 square feet, because what you don't want to do is do 502 square feet or 756 square feet. But, you know, be aware that you go to 800. If you're going to be over 750, go to 800, go to 850 if you've got the space for it. You do get some benefits at being 799 and less because of the estate exempt ADU carve out, I guess I'll say, but really build to your budget and to your need. And everything else, it kind of washes out in the end.
Yeah. And I will also add, having just said my 720 square foot 2-bedroom ADU, it was cramped for 2 bedrooms. On the other hand, it really depends on the design and the layout. And like, I don't know who designed it, so I apologize to that person in advance. It was built, I think, like in the 70s. But, if you have a good designer, you can make a much smaller space work. So it also really depends on the design and the layout. And Gopal's
And,
asking, it was 1 bathroom,
yeah,
2-bedroom.
once you go to two
Um,
baths, you really want that space.
yeah, and yeah.
Bathrooms have kind of a minimum amount of space if you're doing, a bathroom for just for it to work. One
Mhm.
and a half baths maybe, but really go to 800, go to 850 if you can swing it.
Exactly.
It's really gonna be much more livable that
Especially if
way.
you want to have an accessible ADU, which I'm always encouraging folks, if you can build accessible, please do.
Yeah,
You never know if you'll want to live in that space and you'll need an accessible unit in your older age, or you'll have a family member who would benefit, or just a member of our community. So it oftentimes doesn't cost that much more to make it accessible, depending on the number of beds and baths you need in a certain amount of space. So definitely, at the very least, consider it. Let's
yeah.
turn to Timothy's question. In Napa, I have 2 detached garages on 2 different properties that are on or very near the lot lines. Will we be able to convert these to ADUs? And I would add, owner occupancy definitely comes up when you're thinking about the 2 properties. And that gets back to that timeline in terms of your project.
Yeah, absolutely it does. So the short answer, I'll start with the short answer instead of the long answer this time. The short answer is yes. The long answer is yes, but there may be some uh, additional things you need to do during the build to allow for it. What I mean by this is, first of all, before we look at from the planning side of the thing, yes, you can convert garages that are on the property line or within the standard setbacks. And as long as the footprint doesn't change, you are allowed to add up to 150 square feet for ingress egress, front door, mudroom, something like that. But the rest of the footprint needs to stay the same. So you can't go to a second story, for example. You can't bump out. You're limited to that footprint of the existing garage, which can be a challenge for some. Um, for depending on the detached garage condition and depending on your yard, again, all these things depend on your exact property. You it can sometimes it's a great fit and it's the size that you've got and the property requires it, go for it. Um, Often I will suggest if you've got the space, you may want to start from scratch. Converting a garage is a bigger job than most people think it is, because it is a utility space, and often if it's an older detached garage, most detached garages are post-war or pre-war. Um, they take a lot of work to become a two-code residence in 2022. But the other thing is if you do convert these garages and they're on the property line or they're within the setback, very often, I think always, um, the walls that are
Phone
on the
charging slow.
property line will have to be built to higher fire resistive construction. So 1 hour firewalls, baffled venting, reduced windows, combustible siding, what they call Chapter 7A in the building code. They do this anytime you're too close to your property line. And in some jurisdictions, such as Napa, if you're 4 feet from the property line, you still have to build to higher fire resistive construction. Now, um, everybody does build to fire resistive construction every day. It's a normal thing. It's not that weird. It does add a little bit of cost to the build. It does require a little bit of documentation in your plans. You have to be ready for it. But if that's what you've got, the space that you've got, you absolutely can turn those into ADUs. So that's the long answer.
Thank you for that, Scott. That was a really great answer. And actually, it made me want to pull up the Casita Coalition garage conversion webinar. So I'm chatting that to everyone, which is what you heard that weird
That's
sound come up, is me pulling up that YouTube video to share with you. It does a good job of giving you a deep dive of some of the realities, pros and cons of, you know, a garage conversion. We have a couple questions coming up about accessible, which is exciting. So I actually want to share my screen and show you all. So our standard plans gallery, there is an option for filtering for
Good morning, everyone.
accessible units.
Welcome to the
The Casita Coalition webinar that I pulled up came. So I want to share with all of you, where did that go? The some examples of accessible units that are in our galleries. So as you can see here, we have a almost 1,200 square foot 2-bed, 2-bath accessible unit, a 600 square foot panelized 1-bed, 1-bath that's accessible, and another same size 600 square foot. Scott, do you remember, because I know you know these very intimately, is there one that you think would be a good example to pull up to talk a little bit to answer some of these questions from Margaret?
Yeah, I mean, I like the accessible Maywood because of its, I mean, the Andy and the Maywood are the same size. But I remember that the Maywood, if I remember correctly, has some good, like a 3/4 oblique view of the floor plan, which is nice to be able to look at. It's hard to do accessible in a small space because things like accessibility. So we talk about accessibility. We're talking about, no threshold doors. We're talking about hallways that are a certain width. Bathrooms that have enough space in them to turn a wheelchair around in. They're primarily it's sort of a descendant from the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, that applies to a lot more commercial and public buildings applied to a home. They take up a little bit more space. As Renee had said, they don't really cost that much more if you build something designed from the ground up to be accessible. It's probably less than 10% in total cost, but retrofitting something can be very expensive, particularly when you talk about a garage or a bathroom that's not accessible, because you have to start talking about moving walls and plumbing, and that can be tens of thousands of dollars. So building accessible from the start, um, even if you don't need it, I can speak from personal experience that mobility issues can happen in a heartbeat. You can suddenly have an issue where maybe you broke a leg, or it's for an aging parent, and they suddenly have mobility issues. Trying to manage a sudden onset mobility issue problem and try and then adapt the home with ramps and turnarounds and grab bars and things, that is a nightmare to have to live through. It is really, really stressful. Um, and so building from scratch, even if you don't need it now, future proofs you, for your family or your rental, but also provides more housing stock that is available to people who have mobility or other issues that aren't generally met with the existing housing stock. It makes the housing stock at large more equitable. So, um, other things like rather than having a tub, having a zero threshold shower, so that people who maybe have trouble lifting their leg or they're in a wheelchair, they can use the shower more easily. It's hard to do it in less than 600 square feet. I've never seen anything less than 600 square feet for an accessible design. So this is about as small as you can get for accessible. That said, there are things called universal design, which is a term taken from the architecture world for things that are sort of, I won't say accessible light, but it is a design guideline that can happen even in smaller ADUs. Things like counters being a little bit lower or at different heights for people who have, if you're in a wheelchair, a standard size counter is too tall. So some of the counters are lower. Light switches tend to be lower, zero threshold stuff that can be done in a smaller space that can help with mobility issues. Again, doesn't really add cost to it during the build, but retrofitting those kind of features would be very expensive to do after the fact. So accessible and universal design, those are kinds of things that since you're here now and you're building now, it's easy to do now, and it could pay off big for you, big for your family, big for your renter in the future. And I think it's just the right way that we should be building these things, all of them, because they don't really take away for someone who's doesn't have mobility or other issues, vision issues. It doesn't take anything away from those people, but it provides greater equity for housing for people who do have vision, mobility, sight, whatever kind of issues. So I'm a huge advocate for this kind of thing.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was super helpful. And I pulled up and to show everyone on the gallery, if you want to see basically how we can see all of the different units that are marked as universal design in our gallery. So folks can go check that out as well. So
And
I
if
want
you do, I'm sorry, jump in. If you
to,
do, talk to your designers, request it, ask it, let them know that there is a demand for this, because I think that will also help designers keep that in mind when they come up with these things and design more homes, more ADUs that have universal design as the de facto standard, which is what I would love to see.
thank you. I thank you for that, Scott. Could you share, we have a good question from Ryan about impact fees. So saying, is there a little bit of fear mongering about, impact fees in reality? So let's
Yeah.
share about that. And then Ryan also has a great question about the events coming up. So let me just share for those of you really quickly about the events coming up. What were your questions, Ryan? Oh, it's going to rain. How do we register? Yeah. Okay, great. So to register for the events, go ahead to our website. So if you get to our website, let me show you. NapaSonomaADU.org, go to webinars and events, and then you're going to see all of the in-person events coming up in the month of November, and you can click on whichever one you're interested in. So this Sunday, November 6th, you can RSVP here. And yes, it is rain or shine. We have an indoor space, thank you to Crosswalk Church, that we will be transitioning into if the need arises, depending on the weather. So come, please RSVP at our website, napasonomaadu.org, at our webinars and events link, and you can see all of the different events that are coming up and register today. All right, so impact fees briefly for our final question.
Yeah, so impact fees, and actually, I'm going to jump into Gobel's really question about size. I say 800 square feet is probably minimum for a 2-bed, 2-bath. And you probably want to be more than 800 square feet, but if you can do it in 800, that's probably the minimum. So that's it for size for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. For impact fees, I would say that, um, in general, from 750 square feet, you're going to pay some fees. You're going to pay school fees. You may pay a sewer hookup fee. You're going to pay a permit processing fee and probably a plan check fee. And in general, those fees are probably going to be under $10,000. Somewhere maybe between 7 to 12, maybe in that range, depending on your jurisdiction. It really does
This
depend
is
on your.
coming up really high for Petaluma right now at
Yeah,
30 calculator. Do you think that
yeah.
that's an statement for
I
an
think
800 square foot?
Yeah, I think the fees, unfortunately, I think the way that our local government fees on our calculator are I think they're calculating them high in general. Um, and it's impossible for me to say, okay, for Napa it's going to be this, for Petaluma it's going to be that. In truth, um, there are so many conditions about which fees get applied where it can be tricky to know. And from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Um, but in general, my ballpark is 7 to 12 typically for under 750, and then 15 to 2022 for 800 to 1,000 square feet. Could be more than that. I will say if you're in Napa County, Napa San is a sanitation district for the whole county, and their fees are approximately 1,000 square feet for $1,000 for every 100 square feet. So if you build 1,000 square foot ADU, that's a $10,000 fee just for Napa Sand, not including any of the city fees or school fees or things like that. So Napa Sand's fees are, and I'm calling them out because their math is simple, so I can remember it. But that can be a big chunk that you may not see in all areas if you're outside of Napa. School fees are typically between $3 and $5 per square foot. Um, Most of the ADU permit fees are typically a percentage of the project cost, then often with an additional fee for type of project, that kind of thing. So it can be a tough thing to say, okay, 1,000 square feet is going to be this. Um, but I will say, which to Ryan's question, um, if you're looking at between 700 and 800 square feet, or 700 square feet and 1,000 square feet, in truth the permit fees are a fraction of the total cost of the project, and permit fees shouldn't drive your project. Your budget should, your needs should, and that the permit fees they're going to be just part of the cost. because at the end of the day, if this is a rental, and even for people who are building for a family, they are typically going to be renting it to family, not just letting family live there for free. At the end of the day, the amount of rent that you're likely to get is going to pay back those fees within a year or two. And then it's going to continue generating that income over decades. So budget is more important than an actual fee in my mind, because that's going to be the thing that drives a project. That's going to be the thing that limits the project. And I think most importantly, I'll leave it to the end. There is that $40,000 grant from the state for pre-construction costs, which can pay for fees. So, the state is giving away $40,000, which you can use on design and permitting and soils reports and engineering and in some cases utility upgrades for the site to support an ADU. And so permit fees, it's an important thing to understand, but it's not what I would say what should drive the project and determining what size it should be.
Thank you for taking the words right out of my mouth, Scott. I couldn't agree more. And I really appreciate that detailed answer. We are at 12:31, folks. So we are closing for today, but we will continue doing these Ask Us Anything webinars. They're a real pleasure for us, and we get some really excellent questions. It's a good way for us to make sure that we're keeping you all updated about what's coming down the pike when it comes to the Cal HFA pre-development grant, when it comes to changing state laws, etc. So thank you so much to you, Scott, as always, and thank you so much to our wonderful audience. We hope that we will see you this Sunday in the city of Napa. We are really excited about this event. It's going to be lots of fun. If you haven't been to one of our in-person events, it's just so great to get to see potential ADUs that you might be excited about in person in 3D. So
Yeah.
exciting. So
It makes a
thank
big
you
difference.
all for joining us. Yeah, it makes a huge difference. And you get to see me and Scott in person.
Well, now they're going to sign up. Yeah, now they're going to come.
Yeah. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and looking forward to seeing you for a feasibility consult if we haven't yet, or at our event this Sunday. Take care.